Hello, and welcome to The Confident Commit, the podcast for anyone who wants to join the conversation on how to deliver software better and faster.
If you're looking to build a trusted ship, tune in, let's confidently commit.
You're listening to Season 3, completely focused on teams. I'm your host, Rob Zuber, CTO of CircleCI, the industry leader for all things CI and CD. Today, we're doing something a little bit different. I'm joined by jazz guitarist Jeff Massanari, also my guitar teacher, which is how I know Jeff, but he's much more important than that. I will tell you, done some amazing things, played with some amazing people. And well, first of all, just thanks for joining me, Jeff. I'm super excited to have you here.
Thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to. Well, we always have these wonderful little crammed into the 1 hour lesson. We'll have like a 30-second, really deep, I think anyway, good conversation. And then, so I look forward to a little longer one.
Yeah. I mean, that was the inspiration of this. So we've been talking about teams. We've been talking about how teams build and the dynamics of great teams and the time they spend together. And one of the things that I think is particularly interesting, I mean, music in general, musicians working together, you hear like tons of stories of, there's entire documentaries about bands and their lives together and the dynamics and whatever. But jazz and sort of generally, and then you in particular, is a little bit more fluid, I would say. I mean, people show up, sit in, they play with other people, and it all just works. And so I'm super interested to like dive into what is it that makes that possible? Like, why is it possible for people to show up and just kind of be great together in the moment and then kind of disappear? Like in a lot of cases, you barely know the people that you're on stage with, but the performance ends up being, absolutely amazing. And what is it? Kind of what are the dynamics around that? What creates that space? And can we take anything away from that and how we think about, building teams working together? Can we get there faster? Can we produce better results? So super excited to get into all of it. I guess just as a tiny bit of background, I mean, I know a little bit, but I would doubt that everyone listening to this, knows everything about your background. Sort of, you've been doing music and jazz in particular, like most of your professional career, right? And
pretty
sort
much
of what did
everything.
that arc look like?
Well, so I got very serious about the guitar in high school, probably 15, 16, playing blues and rock. And then I came from a family of academic PhD people. So the kind of deal, I knew right away, all I wanted to do was play guitar. So the deal with my dad was I got to go to some school. So I went to Berkeley College of Music and studied performance and composition. And that was pretty much, other than having to supplement income in some of my 20s and whatnot, until I started teaching a bit more. But I'd always taught. I even taught in high school. So I've always liked both teaching and performing. And anyway, so I went to college. I was in Boston area and then I moved out to the San Francisco area believe it or not, in the mid 80s. And so I've been there ever since I've recently moved again. But I was there the whole time. And just my kind of goal was, I didn't want to go the full academic route and end up having my job being in charge of a jazz department at a university or even at a high school, something like that. I'd been around that, so I always did part-time, taught part-time in colleges and high schools. I always wanted to do a little bit of this, and I always figured from an economic standpoint, since there's not exactly vast sums of money flowing about, to have it in different categories, right? So, because the inevitable, one or two of them will suddenly disappear with no warning, and that's fine because you got all this other stuff going on. Diversify. So that was kind of my thought. And then I just all I cared about was I got to find a way to make some sort of a living playing guitar and getting good on the guitar. That was it.
And so, I mean, you've played a bunch. You've played with tons of different people, right? Mm-hmm. We talked about this a little bit, but let's get right into it. Like when we talk about software teams or teams in general, we spend a lot of time talking about building trust, building relationships. But you've been in different locations, doing different kinds of gigs, and then playing. Again, just kind of sitting in, showing up, being the person that anyone can call and sort of just show up and perform, on a short amount of notice. Do you think that those characteristics that we talk about in teams are somehow less important in the environment, or is there something different about the environment that just makes them come about very quickly and very easily so that you can get right into playing and performing?
Yeah, it's a super good and interesting question. I think there's sort of a spectrum of, like, I've played with, for example, San Francisco Symphony Orchestra, and this is like, there's no sort of democratic floating of leadership skills or anything like. I mean, the conductor's up there. You do what that conductor says, or So I've done that kind of thing, and then I've done really loose, freeform jazz where you just, like you said, I show up. A lot of the gigs I do, I'll show up to, and I probably don't know one or two of the people, or if they're Bay Area things, I generally know a lot of the people, but not always, and then often don't know anybody, and it's just totally fine. So without getting too long-winded, I would say, for me, I think the most important thing is being individually prepared and at a skill level where the interactiveness and openness can happen. And without that, so if you've got three people that are really great players and the skill level in the musical domain, and then a certain attitude and openness of mind and lack of ego, really important, I think.
Whoa, that was like a lot came in there at the same time. I was going to focus in on the experience, like the competence. I've done a lot of practice. While preparing is sort of, I know roughly what we're going to play, or I know that I'm competent in this domain in a way that I can just sort of show up and play it. Do you think that the experience is critical? And then on that note, how do you get that? How do you get the experience to show up and play without showing up and playing? Like, what does that look like as a sort of, young player who's just starting out and joining gigs? Is there a process? Is there a way to support you to really get to that? Or do you just kind of absorb the bruises along the way?
I think the latter is most true. I think now you can do that with old days, like old school, like even before my time. There was a thing they called them, like in New York and in the big cities, they didn't call them jam sessions. They weren't like, let's get together and jam. It was cutting sessions. So you'd go there, and the leader would you'd walk up and, hi, I'd like to play a song. And the guy'd go, all right, Cherokee, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, kind of off this blistering fast tune. And if you couldn't cut it, out you go. And there was nobody saying, yeah, you sound pretty good trying. No. So I don't think it has to go there necessarily, but you've got to get out and experience. I mean, you're never going to, if you're always playing with the same group or whatever, you're never going to get the kind of experience that opens you up to being able to show up in a different country without speaking the language and jump in on a song and do well,
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to just repeat that one for anybody that didn't catch it. If you're in the same team the whole time,
right,
there's so much that you're not learning. There's so many experiences you're not getting. I mean, I can think of analogies for software. I'm pretty sure anyone listening to this can think of them themselves, but just, whether it's like technologies you're working with or even styles of working. But how does that show up? I mean, I know because you've told me before that you played in Japan. I'm sure that's probably a decent example of a place where you didn't know the language super well and sort of just got thrown on stage. Like, is the music, or is there truly something different also about the way that people choose to play and interact that you also had to pick up as you were playing?
Good question again. So the music is the music. So if we're playing in a jazz, let's say sort of a traditional jazz standard sort of vibe, we would know you have to know the tunes. So this is the personal competence level. Got to know the tunes, got to know kind of structures and how to improvise. You have to have the vocabulary. If that isn't happening, none of the other stuff can open up. So that's kind of a given basic, what would you call that? Just basic personal skill level and competence and confidence, probably somewhat. Mm-hmm. But past that point, I mean, there's a lot of, I was thinking about this before we start talking. There's a lot of subtleties going on. And so I could play the same tune with the same instrumentation, and it could go in a completely different direction. So it could be okay, boom, bass players laying down super straight ahead thing, no what we call broken time, just swinging really easy. Everything is super like 1960s Blue Note kind of thing. Or we could, and I don't know how it's going to go, and it might go a completely different way, really free and interactive and what we call broken time, where it's all sort of implied. And you have to make those decisions in the moment. You have to know those and be able to react to that stuff in the moment. And the reason I think the lack of ego is important is you've got to kind of have as well, and this is the team thing, you'd have your overarching goal. I want this group, this thing to sound good. Mm-hmm. So it's not about, me, I'm playing this thing better than you, you can't have any of that nonsense. So I think, being open to that sort of interaction and all right, I'll stop there because I got other stuff.
Well, I think the ego thing is really interesting to me. And I think a lot of what I'm hearing is I get to a level, right, where I feel competent, I feel confident in my ability. And now I feel comfortable sitting back. Like the best thing for the song is going to be if I play a really simple part, not try to fill in. And this is true, not just in jazz. This is true in all kinds of arrangement, right? Like, sure, you mentioned the orchestra, right? If you look at the third trombone or something in a symphony orchestra, like that part seems really simple and straightforward. Right. It's probably not the most interesting thing they're going to do that day, maybe, but it's part of putting together this really, really kind of overall piece. And so getting back to the ego and the competence, like, I imagine it's much harder in the early days. Again, you show up at the cutting session or sort of like your first time sitting in and you're terrified and trying to prove yourself versus getting to that place. So is there anything about, doesn't sound like cutting sessions were the place, but is there anything about the environment or the culture that gives you the room to sort of not worry as much about your ego and just learn and grow and develop that competence? Because you could do all the practice you want at home alone, but ultimately when you show up and sit in with a group, it's going to be a very, very different environment, right?
The word that leaps to my mind is mentor in that kind of environment, right? And I think the other thing that I was thinking a lot about was the notion of balance, like balancing I teach, how I teach, and I teach a lot of different people. And when I work with people, I try to find that I'm not the guy that there's some teachers that just scream at people and, you're terrible. That's the worst thing I've ever heard. And some people love that. They're like, oh, okay. And then they go practice really hard. But for me, when I was a student, I just did everything I did on my own. And I just wanted direction. I didn't really want that. So I don't really teach that way. So I think whether it's just maybe being the older experienced player at a jam session or at a gig, just playing at a gig with some younger players or whatever, you give them positive feedback. I'm sure it's what you do all day long. You give people positive feedback, the compliment sandwich or whatever, give them some positive feedback. And then, okay, but I think maybe we could work on this as, maybe your time is feel like you could relax a little more or whatever. And then that's how I think I approach that anyway. Yeah.
Makes sense. And so is mentorship common in, I keep calling it the community. There are plenty of jokes to go around about the size of the sort of jazz community versus maybe pop or rock or whatever. It feels tight knit. And, to your point of the Bay Area, having been to many jazz shows here, you see people just wander in and, oh, hey, how are you doing? They know each other really well. And then there's younger players. Is mentorship something that's really valued? Like, is it something that people really, I want this community to grow. I want the overall, I want this music to be great. And therefore I take it upon myself to help other people? Or is that more of a just personality trait that some people do and some people don't?
I'd say a little of both, but I think it is important and does exist, but I think it's not spoken very much. So I think about this when I used to do a lot of martial arts stuff, and I always used to get asked by somebody, what is your martial art one of the spiritual? Is it a spiritual one or something? And we were really like learning pretty like hardcore, nasty stuff, but what was interesting was all the ones that profess to be the sort of spiritual people, and I think this is true a lot in music too. It doesn't feel very legitimate or very sincere to me. And what does is a really good person who values what they do and wants to help other people. Does it kind of, you would never, I don't know that anybody would even say that. I wouldn't say I'm a mentor, really, maybe to a couple of people, but I feel like I probably do that role and I've been on the other end of that role, mentee, is that right? So I think particularly around improvised music and jazz, there's a lot of unspoken, a lot of things are there that aren't talked about, which I like, actually. I think that's kind of cool. It feels a little bit more, you feel it more than, you get a lecture on it or something.
Yeah, that's cool. That makes sense. So you mentioned, as you were comparing and contrasting sort of the symphony versus, free-flowing jazz, this notion of fluid leadership. You had a word that I forget what you said, but tell me a little bit about that in terms of, okay, so now we're in the moment. We've shown up. We half know these people. We half don't. We know what the song is we're playing. And the concept of leadership is moving around the stage effectively. Like, what does that look like and how does that dynamic work?
Yeah, that's the thing that's always struck me as most interesting about jazz. Because a lot of times in a rock or pop setting, it's like, here's James Brown or here's the lead singer. And it's like, there's no question who it's a giant dictatorship almost, right? So the jazz thing a lot of times is described as sort of, it's all very democratic and kind of almost, but I think there's like an overall leader who gets the gig unless they're really inexperienced. Like I've had this happen a lot where some young singer will get a gig and they're the leader, but they don't know how to be a leader in that idiom. So we'll all sort of nice guys we'll all sort of behind the scenes fill everything in to make the overall group sound good. And this is what I was talking about, the ego thing. Maybe that's it too, is if you got somebody that's not really intent on making the overall thing work really well, they'll just be, this guy's doesn't know what he's talking about. And then they'll start checking their watch or their phone or, something like that. So, but the fluidity would be in a group of very competent people. And I've got a good example that I can tell you later too about, where anybody in there could easily be the leader. Anybody in there could easily direct everything really well. So it's very fluid. So, the person states the melody, and then at that point you're kind of following, supporting them. First soloist comes up, it switches. And my role, if I'm not the soloist, is to support them and make them sound good, keep the rhythm section grooving, all this kind of stuff. But then when I solo, I take a bit more of I kind of tell students at that point, it's not the shrinking flower thing, right? You got to like step up and deliver. And at that point, you're more either I don't know if the leader's the right word, but you're certainly, people are supporting you more than you're supporting them, maybe. Mm-hmm. And that's pretty jazz oriented.
Well, interestingly, like we talk a lot about self-organizing teams in software, and we'll do things like their particular rituals, meetings that you have every day, every week, sort of thing, and maybe from cycle to cycle rotate who's going to lead. So different people can get experience. Different people will lead a little bit differently. Like I think that notion exists. It's not as sort of dynamic and fluid because you have time to talk and say, oh, who wants to do this week, as opposed to sort of like the head nods. Actually, I'm super interested in that. Tell me a little bit about, like, for the non-musicians, how much is happening on stage that's not coming out of the speakers? That's not the music that's being played, but the coordination of the music, the dynamic between the people that are creating it.
Sure. Well, there is... And this would be directly sort of related to how experienced the players are. So I tell beginning students when they're working, I says, this is not when you're going to do the subtle little, that was the cue. I did that. What do you mean you did that? So I always say on that, until you're really good and everybody around you is really good. First off, half the people that are not that experienced aren't even looking at anything. They're petrified, staring down and trying to not hit wrong notes, right? So you got to go, you might have to make a giant head nod and a big guitar cue and whatever. But as it gets, some of it is subtle cues, like maybe, let's say the singer's going to come back in, getting near the end, you can sense that the last soloist is happening. Singer is going to come back in and sing the melody. You can sense that the last solo is kind of finishing up, which is something you do when you're experienced. you project that so that you don't like right to the very end and then stop. And then everybody's like, well, this is the beginning of when I should have come back in and I didn't know you were ending. So you set up an ending. And you can do that without any kind of cue. I mean, the best players don't have to do much in the way of that kind of cueing at all.
Right. So in fact, it is coming out of the speakers, and that like at some point, because what you're playing and how you're performing is effectively signaling to everyone else, hey, I'm winding this down. Exactly. You can tell, I can tell. We all know that we're coming around to another chorus and we know who's next and sort of thing.
Somebody that wasn't sort of versed in that vocabulary wouldn't notice that was anything different than anything. I mean, people don't know very much. Jazz is weird, you know. So.
I think you could tell. I mean, even as a fairly uneducated listener, you could tell. Okay, this is the end of this. Like, if I think as far back as sort of my first few records that I bought, that's right, not Spotify, but records. You know,
oh my God,
you're like, okay, I could tell this person's about to wrap up and someone else is going to come in. I don't necessarily, but cool. I think that fluid dynamic and that sharing of leadership, I think there's tons in there to think about. So, normally we sort of dive into, you know, favorite teams that people have been on, and usually long-lived teams, but so much of your career has been this kind of individual participating with other groups. So I'd love to turn that a little bit and just say, like, can you tell us one or two examples of really, you know, great experiences where it was that dynamic? I showed up, you know, I'm kind of just in the moment, but I knew right away, like, this group is gelling and we're going to do great work. This is going to be a great performance just based on, and what was it that told you that was the case?
Yeah, great. So the two because I thought about this for a quick sec, there are two of these things that stuck out the most. And they're sort of other ends of the spectrum. One would be playing with the San Francisco Symphony. It was actually it was doing a holiday concert with strings and a rhythm section. And Seth MacFarlane was singing the Frank Sinatra songbook. So anybody that doesn't know the Frank Sinatra, Nelson Riddle did a bunch of arranging for strings for Frank Sinatra, and it's like the best stuff in the world for if you like that kind of music. I mean, it's incredible. And they couldn't find the charts, so some guy transcribed all of it, like, you know, going well, second alto was doing this, like, I mean, what? Anyway, just remarkable. But so it was a guest conductor, but the rhythm section was a couple of pretty great guys, and the drummer was actually Peter Erskine, who I'd never met, let alone got to play like 3 feet from. Peter Erskine, if you do a little research, has been on everything from, you know, Steely Dan, like 300 jazz records, 700 pop records, one of the most in-demand studio guys, great freaking player. And the one thing that was really great, the rehearsals, symphony rehearsals, it's like we rehearse for 1 hour and 52 minutes, and then we'll take something break, you know. So, and it stops. They come out and you could be in the middle of the most difficult thing that you really need to work on. And the little union director will come out and say, "Wait, I need to stop." And they all stop. So it's all like incredibly rigid. But the conductor was so efficient, and it was like very top down. But there was no time. It wasn't like, that sounded good, Jim. You know, none of this stuff. It was just cut and dry, but so hyper efficient and nicely done still. And then the main thing that I remember from that was Peter Erskine, who, having played with all this stuff, he's doing a holiday concert. For me, that was a big deal, that gig, right? For him, it was like, you know, whatever, you know. And but he was the guy he'd raise his hand and say, you know, I noticed that the trumpets at bar 52 were playing really short, crisp 16th notes. You want me to go with that, or do you want me to just lay down something else? No, go with that. You know, okay. And he's asked all these questions. So here's the guy that could have like not slept the night before, started with a couple of beers or something, gone in and sight read it perfectly. But he was the guy that was asking every little thing. And I thought, this is a pro, man. This guy's really a pro. So that was wonderful. And the way very cool. That. Such a great story. Meant a lot. So that was a top-down thing. Then the thing I did recently, I went down to Asheville. Excuse me. I played with Art Landy, who's a really interesting piano player. Very, very loose very interactive kind of player.
Mm-hmm.
And mostly when we get together, even with people that we don't know, nobody says anything really. It's, you hang, you get to know each other a little bit, and what kind of tunes you want. Sometimes there'll be a list of tunes. I like to do these tunes. We'll do those.
Mm-hmm.
But Art said, he started out, he said, well, I just want to say a couple things. All I ask from myself and from people that I play with is don't play anything you don't want to play. Not a single note. And play only what you really, really feel and believe in, like what your heart tells you to play or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, man, that's pretty. So right away, I know, well, this is going to be fun. And
Mm-hmm.
nobody says that. That's, and so he definitely sort of directed the course of things. And it was real clear from the beginning. He played certain kinds of things that were very open. If you know the term, you do, but if other people know the term outside, it's not super clear within the key kind of stuff. He would push the envelope a little bit in terms of modern sounds. And he did that kind of thing. And it was just a wonderful get-go from the beginning, utterly interactive. Everything was fun. And everybody took lots of chances. And I would say everything worked. There was even a time where he messed up this time signature. And it was kind of weird. We're like, where's he going with this? How can we figure out how to get this where it needs to be? And he was kind of, but that was fine. But
Mm-hmm.
other than that, it was just really high level. And the audience seemed to really enjoy that level of creativity and interactiveness. So that was fluid, and he'd say, call a tune or, and if you wanted to do something, you could do anything you wanted and it would be okay because of the people.
Yeah. So both of those stories encapsulate something for me in my whole hypothesis that we could learn something about how to be better teams by talking about this totally, like, it didn't take very long, a couple sentences to say, this is what I value. You've come to my performance, so there's a clear leader, but let me establish for you the values in a couple of sentences, and we're just going to go. And so you've created that team environment. Again, it wasn't a multi-month process. It was just, we're going to go play on stage in 10 minutes. Here's how I think about it. Let's all have fun. And sort of like everyone takes a sigh of relief. Oh, this is not a high stress thing. There's comfort, psychological safety would probably be the term that we would use. And so that, and then the other thing with the symphony was more the leading by example with the curiosity and humility. Everyone's saying, okay, this is a person who could show up and, as you said, like have a couple beers, be, just threw their clothes on as they were running out the door 5 minutes ago.
Right.
But demonstrated, if you want to be a pro, like, pay attention, ask the hard questions or just the interesting questions. Don't assume that you know everything, but really bring that humility. I think there's some fantastic leadership, again, in very, very short moments before you just step on stage and go. I think that's super, super cool.
The only correction would be we were on stage. We didn't even, we were sitting down getting ready to play the first tune, and he says that it wasn't even 10 minutes before. So they're
even better. Better, right? It's not, it doesn't take a lot, I guess. Yes, you take, over time we build more, but it doesn't take a lot to start setting the tone, right? This is what we value. This is what I value. This is how we're going to perform together, put everyone at ease and allow everyone to just have an amazing performance. And to your point, like, things went a little weird, right? We've lost the time signature. We're all looking around like, what do we do? But we figured it out because we weren't stressed about it, right? So everyone was like, oh yeah, this is cool. Like, everyone here is going to think we did this on purpose as long as we find our way back to something that's, that's jamming.
Exactly.
Awesome.
And one quick other thing. Art said, I think I told you this in one of our lessons, but Art said something which, well, two things. The drummer that was on that gig is a guy I've known for years and really like a phenomenal musician. And he told me he started playing with Art 25 years ago, and he used the word mentor. He said, Art's been my mentor ever since. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. And Art just says these things. So he said this thing, which was really cool. After we played the first set, he said, man, everything sounds great. Love everybody's playing. Really wonderful. And just, know that, he says, when we get to this point in our career, we don't need to play to prove competence anymore. So try something different, try something new, experiment, and it's going to be fine. But I love that expression of, because it's very tempting in any field, and you have to sometimes prove your competence in some way. Otherwise, nobody will hire you or whatever. But it's interesting to think that you don't have to always do that, and sometimes you can do something at a higher level, maybe.
Well, more importantly, well, maybe equally importantly, I'm not going to judge when you don't feel like you're being examined for your competence, you're likely going to produce a better outcome, right? Like to the point of the best thing for the song, the best thing for the group in this example is for me to dial it back, like not play 600 notes, but just like a few really meaningful notes, or we'll take it in another direction. We're just going to go explore something because so like, we're not going to come up with something new and interesting if we feel like we're just here trying to prove that we know how to do the thing. Right.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I love that notion. I think it, ties nicely back into the ego point from earlier. And again, overall, just very few words establishing we're all really comfortable here. We're all here to have fun, and us having fun is going to be the thing that produces a great result. It's like, I'm ready. Sign me up. Sounds like a ton of fun.
Yeah, it is. Well, the jazz thing is remarkably interesting. Because there's bits of improvisation, even in classical music, there's maybe not improvisation. There is in some, but mostly interpretation, right? There's a lot. You're not just playing the notes. I mean, you're doing different things, but it's like this, and then you come into sort of a jazz perspective, and then instead of the real straight ahead jazz perspective, you come into like the real open interactive thing. And it's like, well, we know we're going to play something with those chords, sorta, with that song, kind of with that melody. But other than that, who knows, And then that's, I thrive on that. That's why I like not being part of a group I've been with some groups for 15, 20 years or whatever, but we play 3 times a year or something, so it's not like, so I love that, being thrown into a new thing. I think it's fun. So
awesome. Well, I think that open-mindedness and attitude also is probably a big part of it. Well, thank you so much, Jeff. This is exactly what I expected. So many interesting thoughts and lessons about how to work with others and how to take things from other fields. And I think for me anyway, I'll probably have to do some more recap outside of this episode of how I take it all. But cool. Super, super interesting. Thanks again for joining. It was a ton of fun to have.
Unbelievably fun and great questions. Yeah.
And thanks to everyone for tuning in. If you want to hear us talk to someone else or about something else, find us on Twitter at CircleCI. Please subscribe on your podcast provider of choice. And we'll talk to you next time. Thanks again, Jeff.
Fantastic. Excellent. Bye-bye.